Live for YouTube. Great. 1 second. It's going to start playing for YouTube. Okay, so good morning, welcome. We are going to be looking at the bare necessities of the Passover Seder. And partly, there's two different reasons for this. One is that with us all doing them on Zoom, it's a different reality than we're used to. Either we're having a Seder by ourselves, and we, it's not as engaging and I don't know if you will, fun, right? As it is when we've got lots of other people around. Or second of all, because there are concerns about what you do once it's already Passover, and what you do if you're starting before Passover, before nightfall. Right? So we're going to get into a sort of a list of things that we would want to make sure to cover once it's dark. And I know that people have all different types of timing issues, and they're dealing with family members, and there's a lot that goes into deciding what to do. But there's questions as to whether things should be done before nightfall or wait until after. If you wait until after, we're talking about a fairly late start, and thus then it makes for a very late evening. And so you may have seen also that there is another program, or not another program, but the Seder that I'm going to promote on the second night of Pesach. I've called Seder Lo B'Seder, because what we do is we start before it's actually the second night, but we do some things out of order in order to make the things that are necessary for being done after nightfall come after a certain time period. So we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along. I'm going to share some texts today. Let me bring them up here. Great. Open the chat. Right, and Shabbat, right? I mean, that's the Myrna's asking, what about Shabbat this year? And that's the same situation. So Shabbat is Passover is immediately following Shabbat this year, and that brings up complications around food, because normally you would be burning your chametz on the morning right before Pesach. You have to do that on Friday. Normally you would do the search the night before, Friday night, but we do that on Thursday night this year. So those types of things. And then also there's the question about whether you eat challah for Shabbat, whether you eat egg matzah for Shabbat. Those are really the two possibilities. Most people don't eat matzah on that Shabbat, because we're supposed to go into Passover with that being sort of a new taste for us. Egg matzah is not seen as the same thing, so you can have egg matzah in the day or the weeks leading up to Passover, but you wouldn't have it. You would want to have regular matzah then for the Seder itself. So yeah, so what we're talking about is Shabbat ends. I didn't bring the exact time, but it's probably it's after 8 o'clock when Shabbat will be ending then. And you would wait until Shabbat's over to start Passover. And we're going to look at sources as to why that is right now. So let me share my screen. Okay, and I keep losing you guys. 1 second. Okay. So here we have a few sources. We start with some things from the Torah, And then we'll look at from rabbinic sources as well. 1 second, got to get everything squared away here on the screen. Okay, so we start here with Deuteronomy, and we find instructions in the Torah about Passover in a couple different places. One certainly back in Exodus, and we'll look at a section from there. But here from Deuteronomy, we see, observe the month of Aviv and offer a Passover sacrifice to the Lord your God, for it was in the month of Aviv at night that the Lord your God freed you from Egypt. And so since the Passover itself, and this is going to be the recurring theme, since the Exodus itself happened at nightfall, at night, then we should observe it at night, right? So this year, we'll use the examples from this year. Saturday is the 14th of Nisan. It's not yet the day when the Exodus actually happened. We would want to wait until the 15th to have that. And so it would be appropriate to wait until after we would conclude Shabbat and start the next day. There's some in-between time in there, right, where normally we would start Shabbat 18 minutes ahead of and all. But those are sort of technical time frames. But here we're looking at really waiting till after Shabbat to get into Pesach, because it happened at night that the Exodus occurred. Similarly, if we look just a few verses later, we see, for 7 days no leaven shall be found within all your territory, and none of the flesh of what you slaughter on the evening of the first day shall be left until morning. You are not permitted to slaughter the Passover sacrifice in any of the settlements of the Lord your God is giving you. But at that place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name, there alone shall you slaughter the Passover sacrifice in the evening at sundown, the time of day when you departed from Egypt. So there again, at the end of that section, we have a timing where the slaughter is going to happen right before the 15th, right? It's going to happen at sundown. Sundown is different than dark, right? Sundown is when we light candles, let's say on Friday night, and dark is when we have 3 stars in the sky on Saturday night. And that time frame difference is about an hour different. It's about 42 minutes from sundown to dark. You add in the 18 minutes of when we light candles, so that makes it an hour from candle lighting to dark. But we what was I going to say? So what I was going to say is there's a number of different opinions. There's a number of different opinions as to whether it's 42 minutes or 50 minutes, or there's different opinions around that. But we usually go with that 42 minutes from candle lighting till not from candle lighting, from sundown till dark. Judith asks in the chat, Rabbi, I assume this section is an answer to what would you say if I asked whether we can start our Seder before nightfall, and not the answer to can I start my Seder before nightfall? Whether we can start versus can I start? I'm not seeing the difference.
And as I understand it, if you ask the rabbi a question, you have to abide by the rabbizer. So you never ask a question before saying, if I asked you, what would you say?
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So, like I say, people are dealing with lots of different realities, and I understand that comes into this as well. There are certainly opinions that say that you can start before sundown, right? There certainly are opinions out there that don't have a problem with that, and others that want you to try and get it as much after nightfall as possible. I'm bringing up that issue more so because if you were to wait until sundown, if you wait until dark to start, then you might want to do more of an abridged Seder in order not to be there for till 1 o'clock in the morning, which some of us do and don't have a problem with, but other people would find that a tircha, a bit of a hardship. So similarly in Exodus, we find also verses that talk about the timing of it. I'm not going to read this whole text, but this is the description of taking the Passover offering and setting it aside, getting ready to make the offering. And then verse 6, you shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of the month, and all assembled of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. So again, that timing of doing it right before night. And then they shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. So to then talking about it being at nighttime, eating it during the time when the Exodus is happening or almost ready to happen, basically the time that the 10th plague, right, was going on while the Israelites while the Egyptians are dealing with the 10th plague, the Israelites are in their homes waiting to leave, and they've had this Passover offering and Passover meal, in some ways the precursor to our Seder, right? And that idea of them eating it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs is going to come up later on as some things that are we would want to make sure to cover in our Seder. Thank you for people that are putting questions in the chat. Please feel free to do that, and I'll stop and pause and look at them as we go on. So this is the rest of that text from Exodus. In order to have our families attend the Seder, we'll have to do it outside. Yes, after dark may be too cold. If I asked you, what can we do before dark on the first night? I'm going to get to that in just a minute, right? I'm going to get to that because as I talked about, we do sometimes we do what we call Seder lo b'Seder, that we take things out of order to get to them before dark, and that way we front load certain things, and then when we get to dark, we can do other things and move along fairly quickly. So yes, I'm gonna go through that. From a teaching from Machon Hadar, if people are familiar with Machon Hadar, they have this text, can you start the Seder early? There's a whole discussion, and this was one piece that I pulled out. Again, looking at the idea of whether it's to start early or not. Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, Bo Pisha 17, entertains the possibility that this obligation to tell the story would be valid starting with Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That as soon as Nisan comes in, we start having this obligation to tell the story of the Exodus, and not waiting until nightfall or dark for that to happen. In accordance with the plain sense of Exodus 13, but creatively resorting to the phrase B'yom Hahu, on that day, which probably originally meant at that future time, right? Not necessarily on the specific day, but it just may have meant, in earlier in times earlier, right, or ahead. The Mechilta rejects any telling before the 14th of Nisan, which is that day right before Passover, which is rabbinically accepted day for offering the sacrifice. The Mechilta then asks whether one could tell the story on the day of the 14th rather than waiting for nightfall. The conclusion, Ba'avor Zeh, on account of this, demands that the telling be done when one can point to the full complement of ritual foods, the matzah and maror. Since these are only to be eaten at night, following Exodus 12:8's description, the accompanying narrative ritual must happen at night as well. And so we want to be doing the majority of the Seder at night. And we're going to look at what are those, again, look at those things that should be at night versus what could be done earlier. So here we have Torah mitzvot and rabbinical mitzvot. We know there's a difference between mitzvot, we say, that are deoraita, that are from the Torah, or derabanan, that are from the rabbis. And these are the ones specifically relating to Passover. There's other things that come up in the Seder, like Birkat Hamazon and Netilat Yadayim, the blessing for washing your hands. But these are the ones that are specific to Passover. The Torah mitzvot are relating the story of the Exodus, the Magid section, and eating matzah. Right? If we were just Torah Jews, then those would be the two things that we would be focused on. But we are in some ways rabbinic Jews, and Judaism that we practice is not just the Torah. It is the Torah filtered through the decisions made by the rabbis over the centuries. So additionally, there are mitzvot around drinking the 4 cups of wine, the arba kosot, eating bitter herbs, the maror, reciting psalms of praise, the hallel, eating the afikomen, which is the extra piece of matzah at the end, and demonstrating acts of freedom, such as sitting on pillow cushions and leaning to the left, right? All those things. Those would be sort of seen as rabbinically ordained, but things that we want to try and hit as we're doing our Seder. I would say those would be, if we really are thinking like, what do I want to do to make sure I've had a, if you will, a kosher Seder, right? Besides the food. And these are going to be the things to focus on. They're going to come up again later on in a further description. So I was going to look at, so that's we had the texts from the Torah. This is a sort of a snapshot of the different mitzvot. We're going to look at some things from Rambam, from Maimonides, who is one opinion. You're going to find other opinions out there, but it's one concise opinion of things that we should be focusing on for Passover, for the Seder. And, we may hold close to Rambam or deviate a little bit, but it gives us a good picture of things. So how about if somebody else wants to read some of this instead of me speaking the whole time? Have a volunteer, if it's clear enough on your screen, and you want to read this text from Rambam's Mishneh Torah. Go ahead, Adele.
All right. On the first night of Pesach, one should introduce some change at the table so that the children who will notice it may ask, saying, "Why is this night different from all other nights?" And he in turn will reply, "This is what happened." In what manner, for example, should he introduce a change? He may distribute parched grain or nuts to the children, remove the table from its usual place, snatch the unleavened bread from hand to hand, and so on. If he has no son, his wife should ask the questions. If he has no wife, they should ask each other, "Why is this night different?" even if they are all scholars. If one is alone, he should ask himself, "Why is this night different?"
And so we're all familiar, right, with the phrase "Mani ishtana halayla hazeh," right, which we see here at the end of his text. It comes up in other places as well, but this is the easiest one to point out. "Mani ishtana halayla hazeh." Why is this night different? And that is in some ways one key element of the Seder, is the asking of the questions, and that through the asking of the questions, we get deeper and deeper into the story and deeper into personalizing it for ourselves. And we do that, we bring up questions in various ways. He suggests, right, having things that you wouldn't normally have, right? So evidently these distributing of parched grain or nuts to people would induce them to ask questions. Removing the table, and we see lots of places in the Haggadah, there's an instruction that says, take the Seder plate off of the table, right? Why are we doing that? It's really to elicit questions from the children or from other people that are there at your Seder. So I would say, right, a key focal point and something for us to keep in mind within our Seder is the asking of questions. We want to make sure to hit that. Next section from Mishnah 4. Somebody else want to read that? People see it.
I'll read that.
Okay, go ahead, Margie.
Right. Mishnah Torah, leavened and unleavened bread, 7:4. And one must begin with disgrace and conclude with praise. How is that? He begins and recounts that in the beginning, our ancestors at the time of Tarak and before him were heretics, erring after emptiness and pursuing idolatry. And he concludes with the true religion that the omnipresent brought us close to him, separated us from the nations, and brought us close to his unification. And likewise does he begin and lets it be known that we were slaves to Pharaoh and Egypt and all of the evil that he did to us. And he concludes with the miracles and with the wonders that were done for us and with our freedom. And that is that he should expound from my father was a wandering Aramaean, Deuteronomy 26:5, until he finishes all of that section. And anyone who adds and speaks at length in expounding this section, he is surely praiseworthy.
Wonderful. Okay, so we see here in Rambam, first thing is that we're supposed to see a transition, right, from disgrace to praise. We're supposed to sort of start in some sort of a low place and move to freedom, right? Really mirroring the experience of the Israelites leaving Egypt. So then he asks, what does that mean and how do we do that? And he brings really the two different stories that we see in the Haggadah. We see a story by Shmuel and we see a story by Rav. Shmuel's story talks about Avadim Hayinu, that we were slaves in Egypt, and continues bringing us to the freedom, the redemption. Rav's story starts off saying we were idol worshipers, right? Talking about what are the roots of our tradition. We began, Abraham's father, Terach, right? The Midrash tells us he was an idol worshiper. And then we end up moving towards monotheism, towards Judaism as we know it, right? And those are two different narratives that we see in the Haggadah that Rambam specifically points to. But really, it's this idea, we want to get some idea of us moving from a low place to a high place, whether that's talking about slavery or whether that's talking about the arc of our tradition. So some sort of sense of transformative experience happening through the Seder. From Mishnah 5, another reader. Yes, Pearl, right? Can't unmute right now.
Yeah. Okay. Mishnah Torah, leavened and unleavened bread, 7:5. Anyone who has not said these three things on the night of the 15th has not fulfilled his obligation, and these are them: the Passover sacrifice, matzah, and maror. The Passover sacrifice for the sake of, to commemorate that the omnipresent passed over the homes of our ancestors in Egypt, as it is stated, Exodus 12:27. And you shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, etc. Bitter herbs to commemorate that the Egyptians embittered the lives of our ancestors in Egypt, and matzah to commemorate that they were delivered. And these things are called Haggadah, recounting.
Wonderful, thank you. So this is the section we're familiar with Rabban Gamliel. Right? It says Rabban Gamliel says that all have to share these three items at the Pesach Seder. They are the sacrifice, right, the Pesach itself, matzah and maror. And we speak about them, and then we end up internalizing them by eating them, right? When we get to them, we in the descriptions, we point to the shank bone or whatever people might use as a substitute. As a vegetarian, we have a beet on our Seder plate in place of the
Beach.
beet. And then matzah, which we eat, and maror, which we eat. And then later on in the evening, when we eat the afikomen, that's seen as the Pesach offering that we're eating there as well. So while we don't eat the bone itself, the shank bone, we do eat the Pesach offering. The tradition that the last thing that they ate, the last thing they were supposed to eat and have a taste of at the end of the night was the Pesach offering. And for us, it's the afikomen. Okay. So again, key thing we want to make sure to have at least mention and then eating these three things into our Seder. From Mishnah 6. Reader?
Who? I did.
Esther, do you want to read?
Okay, I'll do it. Okay, in every matzah, Mishnah Torah, leavened and unleavened bread, 7, 6. In every generation, one must show himself as if he had personally come from the subjugation of Egypt, as it is stated, Deuteronomy 6:23, and he took us out from there, etc. And regarding this, the Holy One, blessed be he, commanded in the Torah, and Deuteronomy 5:15, 15:15, 24:22. Remember that you were a slave, meaning to say, as if you yourself had been a slave, come out into freedom and were reckoned.
Okay, so
Redeemed, I'm sorry, and redeemed.
that's okay. So earlier we had this section where we're talking about this transformative experience of starting in a place in a low place, a place of degradation, and getting to a place of praise. And here, very similar but slightly different focus is really, getting to the point and seeing ourselves as if we were actually enslaved, that we were in Egypt and we went through that personal experience at the time. So doing some things to try and put us into that mindset and experience with the Exodus. Okay. Number Mishnah 7. Reader. Lisa, go ahead. Or do you have a question? You want to read or you have a question?
I'm going to read.
Okay.
I'm going to read. Mishnah Torah, leavened and unleavened bread, 7, 7. Hence, excuse me. Hence, when a person eats on that night, he must eat and drink while he is reclining in the way of freedom. And each and every one, whether man or woman, is obligated to drink 4 cups of wine on this night. We do not lessen them for him. And even for a poor person that is sustained from charity, do we not lessen the 4 cups for him? The requisite amount of each of these cups is a revi'it.
Good. Okay, great. So we see what's an important thing for us to have are the 4 cups of wine, and that is for everybody, right? We're not going to get too much into the obligations of a man versus a woman, right? But bottom line is this is all encompassing for the Seder. And even it says, and this is an important thing for us to focus on, even for the poor person who receives money from a charity fund, they should also have 4 cups of wine. So you'll see information coming out about a collection called Ma'od Chitin, which is money that's collected in order to help support people to have their own seders, and certainly other food as well. But that's the idea, right? Is that we want to make sure other people have what they need for their seder. It's very simple, similar to matanot le'avyonim that we just had at Purim time. The reason for matanot le'avyonim is gifts to the poor, is that we're going to sit down and have a Purim Suda. We're going to sit down and have a Purim meal, and we shouldn't even contemplate doing that if we haven't provided others the ability to have that same type of a meal. So we give matanot le'avyonim for Purim. We give ma'od chitin for Passover. Everybody should have 4 cups of wine during the Seder. Right? And the last Mishnah that we're going to look at is number 10. One more reader. Alan. You're muted, Alan.
There we go. Mishnah Torah 11 and unleavened bread 7:10. One recites a blessing over each and every one of these 4 cups on its own. In addition, one recites the sanctification of the day, Kiddush, over the first cup. One reads the Haggadah over the second cup. One recites the grace over the meal over the third cup. And one completes the Hallel and recites the blessing on the song over the fourth cup. And if one wants to drink between these cups, he may drink. However, between the third and the fourth, he may not drink.
Is there a question? Is there a difference in the obligation between men and women drinking the 4 cups? No, as we saw before, men and women are both included, right, in having 4 cups of wine at the Seder. And certainly, anytime I say wine, I'm talking about wine or grape juice. Right? Grape juice is a valid substitute for wine. So here we see the division of the Seder. There's 4 different cups, and each cup is connected to a different part of the Seder. The first one kicks it off with Kiddush. The second then is is the retelling of the Haggadah, is Magid. So we'll do a lot of different Magid things, and then conclude it with a cup of wine. There's a couple places in it where we even lift up the cup, right? So that we're really connecting that cup of wine, that second cup, with the Magid. The third cup of wine is connected to Birkat Hamazon. There's a tradition that some people have. Anytime they do Birkat Hamazon, certainly on Shabbat and a holiday, they do it with a cup. Right? It's not something that a lot of us are familiar with, but just as they start the meal with a cup of wine, they pour a cup. It's usually just the person who's leading Birkat Hamazon. He'll hold it. In most cases, it's an orthodox and an observant place, so it's a he. Will hold the cup during Birkat Hamazon, and at the end, just as we do on the Seder, then say Borei Pri Hagafen and drink from that cup of wine. So it seems sort of new and connected to Passover for us, but this custom of doing Birkat Hamazon over a cup of wine is a tradition in other parts of Judaism as well. And then the last cup is for Hallel. We say some more Hallel stuff, and we recite the blessing that concludes Hallel, and then we make the blessing over the 4th cup of wine. So those divisions we want to see in our Seder as we're crafting something. We want to be able to have these 4 different parts, and each one of them connected to one of the cups of wine. So that's all the background. That will then lead us to looking at what we really want to include in our Seder. So of course, we start off with Kiddush. And we're going to then have the 4 cups. We just spoke about them being connected to these different parts of the Seder, but they're also symbolic of the redemption. That there are 4 terms in the Torah, in Exodus, that God says, I'm going to redeem you and take you and bring you and save you. And each one of those is sort of one of the cups of the Seder. And so we want to make sure to include those 4 different cups. Kiddush, we would want to make sure that we do on after nightfall. Now, again, there are different opinions, and you're going to find some that say that you can do Kiddush before nightfall. But in some ways, it's something that should be saved for after nightfall. Similarly with Orchatz and Karpas. Now, Orchatz is the washing of the hands, right? That we do without a blessing before we eat the Karpas. Back when we looked at Rambam, one of the things that he said around giving out treats and all. Oh no, it wasn't in this one. No, sorry, I didn't bring it. In his section where he talks about the karpas, he says that everybody should eat at least a kazait. A kazait is a certain measurement of food. It's seen as like an olive's worth, right? I've seen some instructions that tell people not to eat a kazait's worth, because if you eat a kazait's worth, then you're supposed to say a blessing afterwards, right? And we don't do a blessing afterwards.
Kazait.
It's kazait, it's like a zait is an olive's worth, right? And the question is, how much is that? Is it sort of like standard olive that we might know about?
Yeah.
They were larger and like the size of an egg. And so there's a question as to whether to eat that much or not. The reasoning not to is that then you have to do the blessing afterwards, and we're not going to do that as part of the Seder. We have down here. I recommend a pretty substantial karpas course, right? Especially if you're doing the Seder and you're going to sort of put in everything that's there, right? You're going to be there for a couple hours. That you don't want people to be wondering when they're going to eat, right? This is the age-old conundrum. When do we eat? When do we eat? And so we roll out a whole course of things like things that you would dip. So crudités that you would dip in either like salad dressing type stuff, or we eat kitniot, so we make hummus, so we can dip it in hummus. We have sweet potato French fries to dip in ketchup. We have artichoke to dip in butter. All these different dippings that we do, and it's sort of a substantial karpas course. And we do that when we start before nightfall, right? We do that before nightfall. We would skip Kiddush and then go on to karpas, right? There are some who say if you are not going to do Kiddush, you shouldn't do karpas until after nightfall, because you don't want to confuse things later on. But we feel like it's okay. We're going to remember that we had done karpas earlier, and we can make a quick nod to it later on. But we really want people to be able to sustain themselves, to be able to survive through the Seder. So we give the substantial karpas. Yachatz, right, the breaking of the middle matzah, that could be done before nightfall or during or after. But either way, you should make sure to include it. The big one that's going to be the question of how much to do is in Magid. A lot of these other ones, even Karpas, even the mentioning of things later on with Rabban Gamliel, they're quick. We get through them and we're done. It's the Magid that's really the big section, and the question of which things should we make sure to mention. So I've got here sort of split out what are the things to make sure to hit and additional add-ons. You're going to say the additional add-ons are the fun things, right? The 4 children. Who can imagine having a Seder and not talking about the 4 children? The 10 plagues, Dayenu, the early parts of Hallel. So those are things that if we're looking for stuff to do before nightfall, we would put then, right? So we would start off and we would have Karpas and we would start doing some of these things as part of Magid, right, before nightfall, so that when we get to when it's dark and we say Kiddush and we give a quick nod to Karpas, we quickly go through some of these other pieces of Magid. The ones to make sure to do on Pesach itself are Halach Ma'anya, and this is the section, right, that's talking about the bread of affliction. The 4 questions. This gives that connection to Rambam's, the section from Rambam saying that we should make sure to ask each other questions. Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves in Egypt. This is one of those 2 different narratives that we look at to go from degradation to blessing. Right? Some sort of review of Aramio Veravi, which is my father was a wandering Aramean. And again, this is that second stream of that transition. Then we have Rabban Gamliel's presentation of the ritual foods, pointing to each one. This is the Pesach, this is the matzah, this is the maror, and which one, why do we have them? And it's a small paragraph for each one, but make sure that we do that because we want to include those things. And then some section from Hallel. But you can also do sections from Hallel earlier, if you haven't done it earlier, to include some of them there before the meal. We then go into the other things, which again are pretty quickly. The second cup of wine ends Magid. Rachza, the washing of the hands, Motzi, Matzah, Maror. I've got some additional letters there and whatever else, and Korech, and the sandwich, right? And then we have Shulchan Aruch. We're into the meal. After the meal, we want to do tzafun, which is the afikomen. Do some sort of Birkat Hamazon. Have our third cup, which connected to Birkat Hamazon. Some highlights, at least some highlights from Hallel, and Nirtzah, concluding the Seder. Okay? And then anything you want afterwards, additional songs and discussion. Like I said, I think that the key thing that people can look at as ways to, if you will, abbreviate is the Magid section. These are the main ones that you want to have in your Seder. And then you can add in any of the others that you want. And even with like Aramia Veravi is a section where there's a whole midrashic look at it. It takes it apart, one sentence and an explanation, and another sentence and an explanation, and that's additive, right? Read the initial paragraph, and then you can talk about it a little bit, but at least you've got some mention of this narrative. Helpful to have this list with exact notations about okay, yes, I can put that together, right? I have a write-up of, like I say, of our Seder Lo B'Seder, of what we do when we move it out of order. I can put that up on the, I'll let people know where I put that up on the website. Alan.
I noticed that in the Rambam section earlier, where he talks about reading from Deuteronomy, Arameo Vedavi, and he says read the whole section, but yet the rabbis did cut off the last sentence or two about, which is part of that recitation, where and brought us here into Israel and to bring the et cetera, et cetera. And I know I've heard to some extent, sometimes you view the second half of the Seder after the meal as dealing with Hallel and sort of the conclusion of bringing us into the land or celebration in the land. But it's interesting that he specifically says, read the whole section, but we don't, or the rabbis excluded the last few sentences of the section.
So he says, does he specifically say the verses, or did?
No, he just gives the first verse.
Right.
And says until he finishes all of that section. But we don't actually.
Oh, okay.
In a standard Haggadah.
Yeah. Okay. I'd have to look at it. That's interesting. Great. Okay. Thanks. So last thing I wanted to do, and then certainly room for questions, is I wanted to share a couple of resources. So if people are looking to get something to either help them prepare their Seder or to use as a Haggadah, these are a couple of options. So one is a book called A Different Night, which maybe people have seen. It's got within it, it even gives you some information of sort of like how to do a bare bones Seder versus the fuller experience. But lots of commentary and engaging descriptions of things. There's then a second one that came out by the same person. Noam Zion put that one out. Same individual with his son, called A Night to Remember. And this one, they jazzed it up. It's in color, but also with a lot of interesting perspectives, narratives about it. There is a book out called Creating Lively Passover Seders, right, where you can find some things within it and different texts, different discussions are going to speak to different people. One of the things to certainly be aware of, I'm going to stop this share. If we want to bring it back up to look at anything, we can do that. One of the things to note is it's not possible to cover everything in depth. Right? It's going to be a very, very, very long night if you do that. So we all, no matter what we're doing, we all have to make choices as to which sections we focus on. We had a Seder when I was in rabbinical school in Jerusalem, and it was with, I think, 4 of my classmates and their partners, and we realized this was the one time in our lives that we were going to be able to do a Seder that really focused on lots and lots and lots of different pieces. And we ate dinner somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning, and continued then through the rest of the night doing the Seder. And one time we're gonna have a Seder like that, never again. We'll see. We might have an opportunity coming up where we're going to get together with a couple of friends, but I still don't think we're going to have an all-night Seder like we had then. And another book, I don't have the actual book itself here, but I have, this is a series that I have called My People's Prayer Book. And he similarly put out a similar text for Pesach, and I will put that up in, I had that here. see if I can find it. I'll put that in the chat. It's called My People's Passover Haggadah. Where did it go? Put out by Jewish Lights Press. And there it is. It's a 2-volume text, and boom, there you go. So that's the text itself, and then this is a link to finding it. I mean, and it is full of descriptions about the Seder from a historical point of view, from personalizing it and making it really meaningful. So that's another source that I go to a lot for the Seder. Question above is from Shelley. I realize this is about the Seder itself. We advise on the rules of cooking and preparation. That's a whole nother course. Anything in specific, Shelley?
No, even if you would just send a link, I can't remember how much, I don't like to cook on Shabbos at all. But are there additional rules, and what do you do? Anything that'll just point me to what to do.
Great. So we'll be putting up and getting out different information that's helpful. One is a guide that comes out of the Rabbinical Assembly, and it gives guidelines in terms of food and things that are kosher for Passover, and what things can you get that you can buy even without any kind of hechsher. What kind of things can you buy with just a normal like hechsher, like just an OU, or what kinds of things need a special kosher for Passover hechsher. I have another. Myrna says that it's online, right? So that's what we'll send out. We'll send out that link. I have another guide that I use also that comes out of a Sephardic community, and that gives some different guidelines. Especially, it's important to me, especially because we, like I said before, we eat kitniot, right? So the Sephardic traditions of allowing for beans and rice, they cover in that one, and whatchamacallit. So I look to that one as well. And I'll be honest, right? If in either one of them it says that there's some sort of leniency, I follow those leniencies, right? Passover is not meant to make us crazy, even though it does.
No.
And I want to if I find something that I feel comes from a trusted, reputable source, I'm going to go with what they say is you're able to use. In terms of preparation, you're right. Like this year with Passover falling right after Shabbat, if you don't cook on Shabbat, then everything's got to be prepared by Friday, or else you can cook on Yom Tov, which then means after Shabbat ends, you can cook as long as you're using an existing flame. So we light a yortzeit candle before Shabbat, and then right after Shabbat, we'll take a match from that candle and light another one so that it burns through the first day of Yom Tov, and then we'll take a light, and at the end of first day, we'll transfer it to the next, because on Yom Tov you're allowed to transfer flame. You can't light a new flame, and then once you have that, I'll then take that, and this piece might not measure up to a strict halachic verification. But what I do is I take the flame from the candle and I turn the gas on, completely passing the automatic starter, the electric starter, right? And just get the gas going, and I light it. And then when I'm done using the burner, I transfer that flame back again. So I'll take another match, let's say, touch it into the flame, hold it there while I turn off the gas. So I'm not really extinguishing the flame, right? Because you're not supposed to extinguish a flame. I still have it there on that match. And then I put that back into the candle, or I just put it down or whatever else, right? To let it go out. And in that way, I don't have to keep my burner going all of Yom Tov. If that's confusing and people are concerned about it, you can ask me another time and I'll describe it further. Phil Shapiro, since Passover starts on the first day, can the entire second Seder be done before dark? That's an interesting question, right? Is that we've already done this. Let's say we hold to a strict ruling on the first night and we start our Seder after dark, and we've done everything one time after dark. Could the second night Seder be a little bit more lenient? Certainly a traditional view of that is that no, right? The second night is the same as the first night and brings along with it the same expectations, because the first night it might not have been Passover, right? I mean, that's the reality of why we're having a second night. And if the first night wasn't Passover, then we want to do the second night up to standards as well. So it's an interesting question, but I think that ultimately it would come down and say that the second night carries the same expectations as the first night. Miriam asks about kitniot. So in a nutshell, with kitniot is there's a couple of positions that I could send you information about it. Is that for generations, and it's not a new thing, for generations, this minhag of not eating kitniot was viewed by many as what's called minhag shtut, a silly minhag, but yet it was a minhag, right? And it was a minhag, a custom that people put a lot of weight into, and so there are plenty of people who would say, yes, I know it's okay to eat kitniot, but I just can't get to doing it, right? I just can't, step beyond what was a minhag, what was a custom for so many generations. Yes, right? And for me personally, a combination of the fact that there are these valid opinions coming out of the conservative movement and others saying that kitniot are okay, even for people of Ashkenazic descent. So that's one piece of it. The second piece is that I don't really identify with Ashkenaz, right? Yes, that's where my family came from, right? 4 generations ago. Well, peanut oil is a little bit different than peanuts. But that's where my family came from. But I have really little to no emotional tie to that. Maybe it's because my grandmothers never taught me Yiddish. I don't know, right? But I don't see myself as an Ashkenazic Jew. I see myself as an American Jew. And in the days of the internet and sort of this worldliness, I see myself as a world Jew, right? And so just as in any given week during the year, I might eat tacos and Chinese food and hamburgers, veggie hamburgers. I think that eating that range of foods on Passover is very similar. So those two things together, one that minhag was truly just a minhag, it wasn't really halacha, it wasn't really Jewish law, and two, that I see myself beyond the sense of Ashkenazic, that sort of opens up for me the comfort in eating kitniyot. But at the same time, it did take us a while. Like there were years where we would buy kitniyot and never make it. There were times where we would not have it during the Seder, especially when we were inviting other people, and we wanted, everybody to feel comfortable. And then, for the most part, we've gotten to the point of just saying, okay, here it is. If you don't feel like eating it, don't eat it. But most of the food that we make is not kitniyot. So, in a nutshell, there you have that. So we're past the 11:30. If people want to stay on, if people have more questions, please feel free. If others are looking to break away, completely understand. Everyone's busy. Are there any questions at this point? Pearl.
Are you gonna, I was trying desperately to copy down what you were saying about before nightfall and after it's dark. Are you gonna post that so that we could have it?
Yes, I'll put together something that has what to do before, if you're looking to sort of make what you want to cover on Pesach itself, and what could be done beforehand if you wanted to.
Yeah, I think most of us, if we have children with us outdoors in our backyard,
yeah,
may want to consider doing it that way.
Correct.
Can you also, as part of that, say which things are questionable so that we have the ability to make some decisions if necessary, or is that not allowed?
Yeah, I can try and do that. I can try and sort of give things that if you can do it during, like karpas is one, right? Like if you can, it's better to do it during the meal, right? Or during, after nightfall. But it's also something that, as I said, you can sort of split up, and you could have something more substantial first, and then after nightfall, just have a quick nod to it to make sure to have it during the night. Other questions? Yeah, Adrian.
Hi, I was the one who asked about kitniyot. My name was still Miriam at that point, my daughter's name. So I just want to comment, it's not even a question, but like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was doing my own research on kitniyot, and I came to the conclusion it's fine. I had a whole debate with my mom about it. But I still haven't been able to I buy kitniyot and then I don't eat it, so I just putting it out there. Like I actually, it's sort of, it's like the custom versus the the law or something. But right. I'm still working towards it. I might buy some kitniyot this year again and then leave it in my cupboard. We'll see. But I keep wanting to try it and see how it goes. That's it.
Yes, I understand. Like I said, it took a few years for us to move in that direction as well.
I had a question about the peanut oil. You said that you alluded to peanuts are different from peanut oil.
Yeah. So there are rulings where the item itself and a derivative from the item are two different things, right? So, I certainly know that for a long time, peanut oil was a standard for Passover. I think nowadays it's just harder to find it, but you can use it, and it's not considered kitniyot.
Okay, so I guess that's why my grandmother used it.
Yeah. For a long time, it was used. Again, because peanuts are I think I'm might be stepping beyond my wisdom here, but peanuts I think are a new world food, right? And so those back in Eastern Europe originally didn't know about it, right? And so it wasn't included.
Kind of like quinoa.
Well, quinoa definitely, right? Thank God.
Yeah.
Thank God we've come across this new grain / protein, and there are those who say that quinoa is not acceptable for Pesach.
Right.
But that's really extreme.
But peanuts are a legume, and like peas And I think that's how it is also how it got in that category.
Right. Because some people won't eat like green beans
Right,
on Passover, but they're vegetable. I mean, it's a vegetable.
right.
My mother-in-law said that the reason that we don't eat corn on Pesach is because the Yiddish word for rye is corn, K-O-R-N.
Yiddish word for what?
For rye. I don't know. I don't know.
rye.
I just think corn.
Maybe it was Hungarian.
It came up from, a lot of this came from the fact that corn and maybe beans, right, rice, people would make flour out of them, right? And those flours, then once they're made into those things, then they could potentially be confused with other flour, right? Or used as an additive when you're making other flours. So like I might make a muffin and put corn flour into it, right? Mostly it's regular flour, but then it's got some corn flour as well. And so that was the concern. But it wasn't, it's not, no matter what, it's not chametz, right? And this goes into people coming over to our homes, that even if they're not comfortable eating kitniyot, it's not that they're eating chametz, right? They're not eating on plates that had chametz on them or anything like that. So you could have two people in one family observing differently, and it still be kosher for Passover.
Right. Of course, they don't mention that you can make potato flour, but everybody eats potatoes.
Let's not confuse things with the facts.
Okay.
Can you comment on some of the newer symbols on the Passover plate?
Oh yeah, interesting. So I think that the initial move was to put an orange on the Seder plate. And this is a custom that maybe people have heard about. And there are a couple of different legends around them. And in my mind, I sometimes get them confused, but it basically came from Susanna Heschel, who had been having a conversation with somebody about women and women's participation. And on some level, it was like somebody saying a woman belongs on the bima, like an orange belongs on the bima.
I think she denied that one.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that it's gotten changed around a little bit. But that's the basic gist, right? That an orange, that there isn't a place for an orange, and there isn't a place for women. I've heard the same thing around LGBT, people from the LGBT community. So different symbols now people are placing on the Seder plate. We have in some years put a tomato, and we don't put it on the Seder plate, but like on the table next to the Seder plate, we put these things, a tomato, because of the conditions under which immigrant workers are working in tomato fields. I went down, when I was in Sarasota, I visited a place called Immokalee, Florida, where the tomato growers, the preponderance of tomatoes in the country comes from that area. And their working conditions were horrible. And the farmers were, and both the farmers and the employers, which weren't necessarily the same thing. Like the farmers would get workers from these sort of overseeing bosses, and the bosses were garnishing wages and holding people's passports. And in some cases, it was literally slavery. It's gotten better. there's a fair food. There's something called the Fair Food Initiative, and some of the farms are paying in additional monies to be able to, or I shouldn't, not the farms, the buyers. So like supermarkets and restaurants are paying an additional amount to whatchamacallit, to support oversight, right? So there's organizations that now go around and make sure that that the workers are being treated fairly and paid fairly and so forth. Susan says tomato workers now have labor agreements, some of them, right? It's still not across the board. And in fact, there's still a boycott, if you will, against Wendy's, because Wendy's does not buy from fair food tomato growers. So, and down in Florida, the supermarket chain, Publix, also was not invested in this. So yes, for the most part, there are, but there's still issues around it. So there's, I mean, and we could start talking about other symbols as well, trying to think of other things that.
We had an olive to our Seder plate.
Okay,
and
great.
That is supposed to symbolize peace between the Palestinians and Israelis.
Great, right?
And I had a pine cone, but I can't remember what I had that for.
A pine cone. I don't know. I don't think I've heard of that. Yeah, I'm sure if you wanted to do a search online for symbols on the Seder plate, you'd find lots of them nowadays. And it's a different way of personalizing the story and connecting to it for ourselves today. Okay, well, I thank you all for joining, and look for information coming out in the next week or two about the Seders. And people should feel free to either email or call with other questions that you might have. There's going to be another session called Seeing Ourselves as Leaving Egypt, right? And that's going to look more in sort of the emotional and spiritual preparations than the physical here. And then we'll have a performance, if you will, by Lula Chazum, who's done a couple of programs with us already, and she's going to do some Sephardic melodies of Passover. Nancy is saying there's no requirement to eat kitniot. Absolutely, right? I seem to be fine with the tradition I grew up with. I don't feel deprived at all. There's so much one can do with non-kitniot. Absolutely, right? It's certainly a different experience for what we call vegetarians, right? Giving some different options. I think one should pay attention to the way you feel about your own traditions. If they feel restrictive, you might experiment, certainly. Right. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Great. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a great day.